This is Dreamweaver here, and I have a question for Eagle. If you can explain a little bit on the purpose of processing and the relationship to imprints.
Okay. When a person is sharing their story with a friend or a colleague or whatever, and they start just giving their story, most of the time, it's either opening something up, opening the imprint up, or closing it down. And the third option is they're just sharing. If the story comes off where they're really excited, like they're really selling it, I mean, just like it's really true, they want you to agree because they need support. They're looking to close that story, make it into an imprint. So they're really just processing to hold on to their issues. They're processing to keep locked into whatever cycle of behaviors they're in. If they have to sell it too much, the old sorcerers used to say, what happens if they're trying to sell their story, they're actually pushing their aura, their energy field, over the people they're talking to and creating a cloud so the person they're talking to can only think about what the story coming at them is. And anybody's been standing out now, really strong wind, no, the only way you stand still is to face the wind, and you got to focus. Well, that's what that cloud does. It holds on. And so people are really selling their story, usually is just processing to close down the memories or close down the imprinted memory. Now, the other kind of story is the one that is trying to open up the history and vent it, let it go. Their usually story comes off with questions, like, well, how did you do this? Or how did you handle this? I remember going to Shandi a couple times, and she was in her 90s at that point, and I knew she had a long history of leading groups. And I used to say, well, how did you teach the kids? And she would tell me how they would bring them into the sweat lodge and have the top open or no blankets and still have a fire and teach them in that way. So she would share. And in doing so, I was able to process out my experiences, but to let go, to expand them, like we talked about in the earlier principles. And the way I extended my relations. Other folks do that in a different way. A lot of times they, instead of asking questions, they're just going to, share what happened to them. And if they're really truly sharing, they will add what they learned, either at the beginning or at the end, or maybe in the middle too. I shouldn't get locked in on that because it happens in a lot of ways depending on the personality. But there'll always be something about what they learned from the experience. Now, some more academically trained people will say, well, this is what I took away from the experience. Well, that's cold, man. And it sounds like it was a clinical thing. It's not, it doesn't have no intimacy to it. It was like they were listening, but they weren't really engaging. They weren't really in the relationship to whatever the story was. They were sitting back judging it all the way along, trying to see what they were going to get out of it. That's just processing. That's trying to close down something again. It's not opening it up, and it's not sharing the lesson. So basically what I'm talking about with imprinting, there's sharing what you learned, there's opening up the imprinted memories, and there's closing down the imprinted memories. And usually how the person is telling the story, you can determine which one it is and decide if that's okay for you. If it's not okay for you, then you have to intervene and do something. Anyway, that's 3 different ways stories are told, and those are some ingredients of them. That's what we've learned over 40 years of spiritual healings. Anyway, as always, maybe something to it. Got to go get out there and try it out, though. Make it your own. I hope. Thank you.